There are moments in life when everything changes in a single heartbeat. Not because the world transforms around you, but because suddenly, people finally see what you've always known about yourself. Priya had waited for that moment for 3 long years, 3 years of whispered doubts, 3 years of watching younger trainees climb ladders she built with her own hands, 3 years of remaining silent while her competence was questioned simply because of how she looked. But, when that moment finally arrived, when the black viper mark on her spine was revealed to the world, nobody in the security agency would ever doubt her again. What started as rejection became redemption, and what began as humiliation became the most talked about revelation in the agency's history. This is the story of how the woman nobody believed became the woman nobody could ignore. Priya had always known that first impressions mattered in the security world. She understood that presence meant something, that authority had to be carried in the way you walked, the way you held your shoulders, the way your eyes met the world without flinching. But, what she hadn't fully understood when she joined the National Intelligence Bureau's training program 5 years ago was how much her gentle face would work against her. At 23, with soft brown eyes and a voice that didn't naturally command rooms, she looked more like a university student than someone trained to handle crisis situations. The senior trainees never said it outright, but she could feel it in the way they distributed tasks, in the way they saved the important operations for the others, in the way they smiled at her like she was trying to do something she wasn't built for. The training facility sat 3 hours outside the capital, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills. It was a place designed to push people beyond their limits, to strip away ego and build something harder in its place. Priya had arrived on a monsoon afternoon, her single bag containing everything she owned, her heart containing everything she wanted to prove. From the first day, she realized that her gentle appearance would be her greatest obstacle. The instructors treated her differently than the male trainees, giving her slightly shorter runs, slightly lighter loads, slightly easier assignments. It wasn't cruelty, it was assumption. They assumed she wanted different work, different challenges, a different path than the others. What they didn't understand was that she was there for exactly the same reasons as everyone else, and that their protection would only slow her down. By the time she was assigned to the permanent team at headquarters, 3 years into her career, Priya had learned to navigate this world of low expectations. She worked in the Intelligence Analysis Division, a position that was respectable but remained largely behind the scenes. Her job was to sift through data, identify patterns, create reports that would inform operational decisions. It was important work, essential work, but it was work that nobody saw. When the major operations came down, when the real intelligence breakthroughs happened, other people's names were attached to them. Priya's contributions were listed in footnotes, in acknowledgments that came at the end of official reports, in data visualizations that she created but that other analysts presented to the leadership. The new batch of trainees arrived one cold January morning. Priya was in the office when she heard the announcement, 30 new recruits coming through the program, the largest intake in 5 years. The senior management wanted all division heads to contribute to their training, to shape the next generation of security professionals. Priya was brought in to teach analysis, to show them how to read intelligence reports, how to identify the threads that would lead to bigger pictures. She wasn't excited about it. She knew that her teaching assignments usually meant watching younger trainees treat her as a helpful resource rather than an authority, someone to go to with questions rather than someone to learn from with respect. The first training session happened on a Tuesday morning. 30 fresh faces filled the conference room, most of them between 22 and 25, with that particular combination of confidence and ignorance that came with being brand new. The session was supposed to run for 2 hours, an introduction to intelligence analysis fundamentals. Priya had prepared carefully, creating presentations and case studies, developing exercises that would make the concepts clear. She walked into the room wearing her standard agency uniform, dark blue, professional, unremarkable, and immediately saw what she'd come to expect. The younger women in the class brightened up, ready to connect, ready to see her as relatable. The younger men barely glanced at her, their attention focused on the senior male analysts who had come to co-teach the session. One trainee in particular stood out. His name was Vikram, and he carried the kind of natural authority that Priya had never been able to develop. He was tall, with sharp eyes and a voice that demanded attention without trying. Within minutes of the session starting, Vikram had made a comment suggesting that the analysis process seemed overly complicated, that it could probably be simplified with better technology. It was the kind of comment that was technically wrong but came wrapped in enough confidence to make people second-guess themselves. Priya watched several trainees nodding along with him, already buying into his perspective. She had to correct him, professionally but clearly. "Actually, the complexity you're seeing isn't inefficiency," she said, keeping her voice level. "It's necessary because human intelligence requires contextual understanding that algorithms alone can't provide. The cases I'm about to walk you through will show you why." Vikram smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind that suggested he was humoring her. He didn't argue directly, but she could see him dismiss her point, file it away as the kind of basic thinking that came from someone who hadn't been exposed to newer methodologies. Watching him do this, Priya felt something familiar settle into her chest. Doubt. Not in her knowledge, but in whether that knowledge would ever be enough to overcome how people saw her. The weeks of training sessions continued. Priya developed the curriculum, created sophisticated exercises, brought in real case studies that showed complex intelligence work in action. Slowly, she began to see the trainees' understanding deepen. Even Vikram started asking more thoughtful questions, pushing deeper into the material. But there was always a quality of surprise in his interactions with her, as if he kept expecting less and being mildly impressed when he didn't get it. She noticed that when he spoke about analysis, he often referenced things she had mentioned as the basis for his own insights, taking credit implicitly for work that was hers. 3 weeks into the training program, something shifted. The agency received intelligence about a potential security threat at an important government facility. It was classified information, restricted to senior staff, but the trainees were brought in for a limited training exercise. They were given sanitized versions of the data, enough to work with real information, not so much that they could identify actual operational details. The exercise was straightforward: analyze the available intelligence, identify the threat pattern, recommend a response protocol. The trainees were split into groups of 5, and Priya was assigned to supervise their work, to evaluate their analytical thinking, to note who showed promise. Vikram's group worked quickly, pulling together information, making connections. Their analysis was solid, competent, the work of people who had been trained well. But it was incomplete. They had missed a crucial thread, a pattern in the timing of communications that suggested the threat was larger than the immediate tactical situation indicated. Priya watched them prepare their presentation, and she knew she should point out what they'd missed. That's what a good supervisor would do. That's what someone interested in their development would do. But she was tired. Tired of being helpful, tired of making space for others, tired of letting her work support their advancement. So she said nothing. She let them present their incomplete analysis. And she watched as the senior leadership praised their work, nodded at their conclusions, made notes about Vikram's strong initiative and clear thinking. It was petty, and she knew it. As soon as she thought it, she regretted it. But she also understood something in that moment. She would never win by being helpful. She would never advance by making others look good. She would never be taken seriously as long as she remained the kind person, the supportive one, the woman behind the scenes who made sure everything worked properly. Something had to change, but she didn't yet know what that change would be. That evening, alone in her small apartment, Priya did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled up her own file, the classified record that tracked her training scores, her evaluations, her recommendations. She read through it carefully, looking at the trajectory of her career. Top marks in analysis. Commendations for accuracy. Recommendations for advancement that had been filed away with polite notes that she was valuable in her current role. The language was different depending on who had written it, but the message was consistent: she was good, but she wasn't leadership material. She was good, but she wasn't field material. She was good, but she wasn't quite ready for the bigger assignments. She was good, but not quite in the way that mattered to the people making decisions. She closed the file and sat in the darkness of her apartment, understanding with sudden clarity that something had to give. She couldn't keep waiting for people to see past her appearance, her gentle manner, her quiet competence. She couldn't keep hoping that one day they'd realize she was capable of more. She had to make them see it. She had to force a reckoning with what they believed about her and what was actually true. The next morning, Priya made a phone call. It was to an old contact from her training days, someone who worked in the field operations division. She hadn't spoken to him in over 2 years, but she knew he still owed her a favor. Specifically, he owed her for an analysis she had done that had prevented a major operation from going forward based on faulty intelligence. She had been thanked for it in private, but the credit had gone to him publicly. When she explained what she wanted, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That's not a small thing you're asking for," he finally said. "I know," Priya replied. "But it's the only way I'm going to get what I need." He agreed, not because he thought it was a great idea, but because he understood her position. 1 week later, Priya received a call asking her to participate in an actual field exercise. It was unusual for someone from analysis to be involved in operations training, but it wasn't unheard of. She would be working with a small team, doing surveillance and intelligence gathering on a controlled scenario. The exercise would test her ability to work under pressure, to gather real-time intelligence, to make decisions quickly. Most importantly, it would give her an opportunity to prove herself in a context that couldn't be dismissed as analysis work, that soft, behind-the-scenes kind of job that people didn't think required the same kind of capability as field work did. Priya threw herself into preparation. She began training in ways she hadn't trained since her initial intake, running longer distances, working with tactical equipment, practicing the physical and mental demands of field operations. She was sore constantly, exhausted most of the time, and absolutely focused. She trained alone, early in the mornings and late at night, not telling anyone at the office about the intensity of her preparation. By the time the field exercise rolled around, 3 weeks later, she was as ready as anyone could be. The exercise took place over 4 days, in a simulated environment designed to match real operational conditions as closely as possible without actual danger. Priya was part of a team of 6, and she quickly realized that the team composition had been deliberately chosen. The other members were mid-level field operatives, all of them experienced, all of them skeptical about bringing in an analyst for this kind of work. The team leader was a man named Rajesh, who had a reputation for being tough but fair. He greeted Priya with professional courtesy and nothing more, and she appreciated that. No special treatment, no concern about her capability. Just assignment and expectation. The scenarios unfolded across the 4 days, each one building in complexity. The team had to identify a target, gather intelligence on its movements, anticipate potential threats, and execute a controlled intervention. For the first 2 days, Priya felt like she was treading water, trying to keep up with people who had spent years doing this work. She made mistakes, small ones, but they felt enormous in the moment. She moved too slowly in one scenario. She failed to anticipate a threat approach in another. She questioned a decision when she should have trusted the team's experienced judgment. But, on the 3rd day, something clicked. She was gathering intelligence on a simulated target movement, analyzing the pattern of behavior, looking for the moment when intervention would be most effective. Suddenly, she saw it. Not in the immediate data, but in the pattern across the hours of observation. The target moved according to a specific schedule, and that schedule had an anomaly. The anomaly suggested the target knew they were being watched. This changed everything about how the team should approach the intervention. Priya brought this observation to Rajesh, presenting her analysis carefully, laying out exactly how she had reached her conclusion. He listened, asked sharp questions, and then made a decision. They would adjust their approach based on her intelligence. And, when they did, the scenario unfolded exactly as she had predicted. The intervention was cleaner, safer, more effective than it would have been with the original approach. Rajesh looked at her afterward with something that looked like actual respect. The final day of the exercise, Priya was different. She wasn't hesitant anymore. She trusted her analysis, and her team was learning to trust it too. When she made a suggestion about tactical positioning based on her reading of the environment, Rajesh implemented it without question. When she identified a potential complication in the extraction strategy, he took her seriously. She had become, in those 4 days, a member of the team in a way that mattered. Not the person being helped, not the resource being used. A full participant. When the exercise ended, the team gathered for a debrief. Rajesh went through each person's performance systematically, offering feedback that was specific and honest. When he got to Priya, he paused. "You didn't start strong," he said. "You were uncertain, trying to fit in where you didn't have experience. But you learned faster than anyone I've worked with. By day 3, you weren't analyzing information, you were reading situations. That's something you either have or you don't. Most people don't develop it. You did, in 4 days. That's exceptional." Driving home from the exercise facility, Priya felt something shift inside her. She had proven something, if only to herself. But, more than that, she had realized something crucial. The doubt she'd been carrying wasn't about her actual capability. She was capable. She knew that now, beyond questioning. The doubt was about whether people would ever believe in her capability, and that was a different problem entirely. The next week, she returned to her analysis role, and everything looked the same on the surface. The same office, the same desk, the same routine. But she was different. She had tasted what it felt like to be taken seriously, to have her judgment trusted, to be valued for what she could actually do. And she wasn't willing to go back to being overlooked. Section 2 months after the field exercise, Priya requested a transfer. She wanted to move to the Operational Support Division, a role that would combine her analytical skills with field operations involvement. It was a position that didn't technically exist yet, and the request went up through multiple levels of approval. She knew it was unlikely to be approved. People like her, people who worked in analysis, didn't usually transition to operations. They stayed in their lanes, did their jobs, retired after 30 years of reliable service. But Priya submitted the request anyway, with a detailed proposal of what the role could accomplish and how it would strengthen the agency's capabilities. The response came back after 6 weeks, denied. The explanation was professional and thorough, but it boiled down to the same fundamental belief that had been following her throughout her career. They appreciated her contributions to analysis, they valued her work, they wanted her to continue developing in her current division. There was no admission of why she was being denied, no explicit statement that it was about how she looked or how she presented herself. But she knew. She had learned to read the language of professional rejection. It was saying, stay in your lane. Don't try to be something you're not built to be. Instead of accepting this rejection, Priya did something unexpected. She took a month of unpaid leave from the agency. She didn't tell anyone what she was planning to do. She simply informed human resources that she needed the time, and she stepped away. During that month, she drove to a small town in the foothills, a place where an old handler from her initial training had retired, and set up a small operation, private security consulting for corporate clients. She had called him the week after her denial, and he had invited her to come work with him. The work was different from government intelligence. It was more direct, more immediate, less wrapped in bureaucracy. Priya worked with a team of 5 former security professionals, gathering intelligence for corporate clients, identifying threats, preparing security protocols. She was good at it, she was good at most things once she committed to them. But, more importantly, she was learning something about how the world operated outside the structured hierarchy of the agency. She was learning that capability was capability, regardless of your gender or your appearance or your voice. When someone paid money for your work, they didn't care about their assumptions. They cared about results. After 1 month away, she returned to the agency and requested a meeting with her division head, a man named Vikram Saha, no relation to the trainee who had been overseeing her work for the past 3 years. In the meeting, she told him about her month away, about the work she had done, about the recognition she had received from private clients for her capabilities. She told him, carefully but clearly, that she didn't feel her current role fully utilized her skills or represented her actual value to the organization. "I understand," Saha said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Your performance reviews are excellent. But, you understand that operations isn't really where someone with your background typically moves into?" "I do," Priya said. I also understand that I was in the field for the exercise 2 months ago, and I performed at a level that even the most experienced people on the team acknowledged as exceptional. So the question isn't whether I'm qualified. The question is whether I'm going to be allowed to use my qualification." Sahal was quiet for a long moment. "I'll see what I can do," he finally said. "But I can't promise anything." It wasn't an enthusiastic endorsement, but it was something. More importantly, it was a signal that the matter wasn't closed. Priya walked out of that meeting understanding that she would need to be patient, but also that patience could no longer just mean waiting. She would need to keep pushing, keep making her value impossible to ignore. Over the next 6 months, Priya took on projects that sat at the intersection of analysis and operations. She volunteered for exercises, stepped forward when additional support was needed for field operations, built relationships with people in the operations division who could vouch for her capabilities. She was strategic about it, never aggressive, never demanding, but always present, always demonstrating competence. She was building a record that would eventually make it impossible to deny her a real opportunity. During this time, the trainees she had taught earlier continued through the program. Several of them had moved into junior operational roles, and they encountered her in various contexts. She noticed that their treatment of her had shifted. When she spoke now, they listened. When she offered analysis, they took it seriously. She realized it wasn't actually about her being different. It was about the context they encountered her in. When she had been their instructor, when they had seen her as educational support, they had felt free to dismiss her. But now that they were seeing her move into operational contexts, now that other experienced operatives were clearly respecting her input, their perception shifted. It was a bitter lesson in human nature that confidence in someone came not from their actual capability but from seeing others treat them as capable. In the 9th month after her denial, a position opened up. A senior analyst was retiring from the operational support division, and the division head reached out to Priya directly. The job wasn't quite what she had originally proposed, but it was close. She would be working on active operations, providing real-time analysis, working with teams in the field. The salary was slightly higher, and, more importantly, it was a role that placed her at the center of actual operations rather than on the periphery. She accepted the position immediately. Her first week was a blur of new systems, new protocols, new faces. Most of the people in the division had encountered her in some capacity during the previous months, so she wasn't completely unknown. But she was also new in an official sense, and she had to prove herself all over again in this new context. The first operation she supported was a surveillance and intelligence gathering mission targeting a suspected smuggling ring. Priya's job was to synthesize information from multiple sources: satellite imagery, communication intercepts, local intelligence assets, and provide real-time analysis to the field team. For 18 hours straight, she worked in the operations center, feeding information to the team, helping them anticipate movements, supporting decisions. She was exhausted by the end of it, but the operation was successful. The target was identified, tracked, and captured. The smuggling ring's operations were disrupted. And Priya's analysis had been directly cited as crucial to the outcome in the official briefing report. It was the beginning of a different kind of career. Over the following year, Priya became known as the analyst who could deliver under pressure, who understood operations not just from a theoretical standpoint but from having worked in the field. She was assigned to higher priority operations. Her analysis was sought out specifically. She was included in strategic planning sessions. Slowly, systematically, she was becoming exactly what she had always known she was capable of being. But recognition from within the agency was one thing. The greater reckoning, the moment that would change everything, was still coming. It arrived in the form of a major operation planned for the monsoon season, a coordinated intelligence and security action targeting multiple facilities across the country. The operation was being called internally Operation Viper, because of its coordinated nature, the way the investigation would move like a snake through multiple regions simultaneously. Priya was selected to be the lead analyst for the entire operation, responsible for coordinating analysis across all the regional teams, synthesizing intelligence, providing strategic recommendations. It was the biggest assignment of her career, and she knew it represented a fundamental shift in how the agency saw her. For 3 months, she worked around the clock. She coordinated with regional intelligence officers, reviewed satellite imagery, tracked communications, analyzed patterns. She identified connections that had been missed, found threads that would lead to bigger structures, recommended tactical adjustments based on her understanding of the operation's real targets. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. A week before the operation was scheduled to launch, Priya discovered something that changed everything. In reviewing communications data, she found a pattern that suggested one of the key targets wasn't operating independently at all. This person had connections to someone inside the agency itself, someone in a position of authority. The intelligence was partial, not conclusive, but it was significant enough to recommend holding the operation and investigating further. She reported this up the chain immediately. The recommendation caused shock waves through the leadership. An internal investigation was opened, and it became clear that Priya's analysis was correct. Someone in a senior position, someone with authority to make decisions about operations, personnel, intelligence priorities had been compromised. The implications were enormous. The operation was rescheduled. The internal investigation took priority. And Priya became the central figure in uncovering what had happened, not just with the external target but with the internal compromise as well. It was sensitive, dangerous work. There were powerful people who wanted the matter covered up, who wanted the compromised official to quietly resign, who wanted everything resolved with minimal publicity. But the agency leadership decided differently. The official who had been compromised was arrested. An extensive audit of all operations and decisions was initiated. And Priya's role in identifying the compromise was made public within the agency. She became the woman who had caught a security threat that nobody else had seen, the analyst who had turned an entire operation inside out and revealed corruption at a high level. The day after the official announcement of the internal investigation, Priya was in her office when she received a call. The caller was the agency director himself, a man she had never personally interacted with before. He was requesting her presence at a private meeting to discuss her findings in detail and to discuss her future with the organization. She went to the meeting with a combination of anxiety and anticipation. She didn't know what to expect, what he wanted from her. In the director's office, high above the city, with views of the sprawling intelligence headquarters complex below, Priya heard something she had been waiting years to hear. The director told her that her analysis had essentially prevented what could have become a catastrophic security failure. He told her that her willingness to follow the evidence even when it led to uncomfortable places was exactly the kind of integrity the agency needed. He told her that he wanted her to move into a senior analytical role, reporting directly to him, overseeing a newly created division that would focus on internal security and intelligence integrity. It was a significant promotion, a significant responsibility, and a significant recognition of her capabilities. But, before Priya could fully process this offer, the director said something else. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," he said. "I've been reviewing your personnel file, going back through your entire career with us. And I noticed something that I want to understand better. In your initial training records, there's a mention of a physical mark, a distinctive birthmark that was noted in your medical intake. The Black Viper mark. I'm curious about that, because that mark is also mentioned in one of the old intelligence assessments from 15 years ago, before you even joined the agency." Priya felt her heart stop. She had never told anyone in the agency about the mark. She had never mentioned it, never shown it, never allowed it to become part of how she was identified. It was something she had deliberately kept hidden, something that felt too personal to be part of her professional identity. "What assessment?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The director pulled out a file. "This is classified, so I'm sharing it with you only because of the role you're taking on," he said. 15 years ago, before you even knew this agency existed, one of our intelligence assets reported on a child with a distinctive mark on her back, a mark that looked like a black viper. The asset reported that this child was being trained in martial arts, in hand-to-hand combat, in ways that suggested she was being prepared for something specific. The asset believed this child had the potential to become one of the most dangerous security professionals the country had ever seen. The asset believed this child needed to be identified, observed, and, when old enough, recruited. Priya's hands trembled slightly. That was about me. Yes, the director said. That was about you. So we've been watching you for 15 years, Priya. Not in a sinister way, but in the way we watch people with genuine potential. And, do you know what surprised me, looking back through those years of observation? What? Priya whispered. What surprised me, the director said, was that we never saw what the original asset saw. We never understood your potential because we were looking for it in the wrong places. We expected you to become what we thought dangerous should look like, more aggressive, louder, harder in the traditional sense. What we didn't understand was that your strength was in something deeper, something more subtle. Your strength was in seeing what others missed. Your strength was in understanding rather than dominating. And, your strength was in the discipline to wait until the moment you could change everything. He leaned back in his chair. The mark on your back, the black viper mark, it doesn't make you dangerous in the way the asset thought. It makes you exceptional in a completely different way. And, I think it's time the agency understood that. I think it's time you stepped into your actual power. Section 3. The news that Priya had been identified years ago, even before joining the agency, changed how she understood her entire career. It meant that her rejection for the operational support role hadn't been random. It meant that there had been people watching her, assessing her, making decisions about what role she should have. What had felt like a denial based on her gender and appearance might have actually been something else entirely, a deliberate choice by people who understood her full background to keep her in analysis where they believed her capabilities would be most valuable. The bitterness of that realization was complicated by the fact that, in the end, their assessment had been partially correct. She had become invaluable in analysis. But, she had also become so much more. In her new role, reporting directly to the director, Priya established the Security Integrity Division, a unit dedicated to maintaining the internal security of the agency itself. The work was different from operational analysis. It was more political, more sensitive, more complicated in terms of the human relationships involved. Priya had to audit operations, review decisions made by high-level officials, examine patterns of behavior that might indicate compromise or corruption. She had to do all of this while maintaining the trust of the people she was monitoring, while not appearing paranoid or overly aggressive, while building a culture of integrity without creating an atmosphere of fear. Her first major decision was to bring together a team of analysts she had worked with over the years, people who had demonstrated both exceptional capability and genuine commitment to the agency's mission. One of these people was Rajesh, the field operations officer who had supervised her during the training exercise years ago. Another was Marcus, a senior intelligence officer who had first recognized her potential in the trainee program. She chose carefully, not looking for the most politically connected people or the ones with the highest seniority, but the ones who shared her understanding that integrity had to come before everything else. Building the team took time, and she used that time to also research the specific people who had been watching her. She requested the classified files related to the original asset who had identified her when she was a child, the assessment that had led to 15 years of covert observation. What she found fascinated and troubled her in equal measure. The asset had been an intelligence officer named Vikram Sharma, a man who had spent his career identifying future talent, people with unusual combinations of physical capability and intellectual sophistication. He had identified dozens of people over the years, and most of them had gone on to significant roles in the security services. But he had also maintained detailed profiles on all of them, information that went far beyond what would normally be collected. When Priya dug deeper into Vikram's background, she discovered that he had been one of the people recommending against her promotion to operations 5 years ago. He had written in her personnel file that she was too valuable in her current role and that field operations would be a waste of her particular analytical talents. He had been protecting her, she realized, in his own way. He had believed that she would achieve more in analysis than she ever would in operations, and he had worked behind the scenes to keep her there. He had also been one of the people who recommended that she be promoted to this new role, once the internal security investigation revealed her capabilities. Priya requested a meeting with Vikram, who was now in his 70s and still working as a consultant to the agency. When they met, in a secure conference room, she thanked him for identifying her all those years ago, for seeing potential that she hadn't yet understood herself. She also asked him, directly, why he had recommended against her promotion. "Because I understood what you were going to become," Vikram said simply. "Field operations would have been a position where you would have succeeded, but where your true capabilities would have been limited. You were always going to be more valuable thinking than doing. More valuable seeing than acting. I was wrong about some things," he continued, "but I was right about that. Look at what you've accomplished in the past 6 months. Could you have accomplished any of this in operations?" "Probably not," Priya admitted. "Exactly," Vikram said. "So even though I was paternalistic, even though I was making decisions for you rather than letting you make them for yourself, I was actually right about where you needed to be. That's a complicated thing to live with, I know. But it's the truth." Priya wanted to argue with him, to insist that she should have been given the choice herself, that even if his assessment was right, he should have explained his reasoning rather than simply blocking her path. But she also understood something that only came from maturity and distance. Vikram had been operating from the best information he had, with the best intentions he could muster, within a system that didn't value transparency or personal agency. His choice to protect her had been imperfect, but it hadn't been malicious. She could hold both truths simultaneously, that what he had done was problematic and that what he had done had served her well. In her new role, Priya implemented policies designed to prevent the kind of covert surveillance that had been conducted on her. She established protocols that required transparency whenever individuals were being assessed for future opportunities. She created systems where recommendations about career development had to be shared with the people being recommended for or against. She insisted that decisions about people's careers be made in ways that preserved their agency and dignity. 6 months into her tenure as head of the Security Integrity Division, Priya received a report about a young female trainee who was showing exceptional promise. The report was interesting because it came through the official channels, through the published assessment process, rather than through covert observation. The trainee's name was Arya, and she had joined the program with a background in mathematics and computer systems. She was brilliant, according to all accounts, but she was struggling with the same issue that Priya had struggled with throughout her career. She wasn't being taken seriously because of how she looked and presented herself. Priya brought Arya's case to the director's attention, requesting that a specific mentorship arrangement be made to help support her development. The director approved the request, and Priya began working directly with Arya. Their first meeting happened in Priya's office, a space that had become known throughout the agency as a place where capability was valued above all else, where young professionals could come to be taken seriously. "I want to tell you something," Priya said to Arya, "because I wish someone had told me this when I was where you are. The doubt you're feeling about whether people believe in your capability, about whether you're actually cut out for this work, the doubt is not coming from inside you. It's coming from outside, from the way people are reacting to your presence. And I want you to understand that their reactions are more about them than about you. It doesn't mean you should be arrogant or dismissive of feedback. But it does mean that when you find yourself doubting whether you belong, you should check that doubt against your actual performance. And if your actual performance demonstrates capability, then the doubt is about their limitations, not yours." Arya listened intently, and Priya could see the weight of what she was saying landing in the younger woman's mind. "Did people doubt you?" Arya asked. "Constantly," Priya said. "For the first 10 years of my career, I doubted myself because I was constantly doubted by everyone around me. It wasn't until I had proof of my own capability, not just in controlled training scenarios but in actual high-stakes situations, that I stopped internalizing their doubts and started believing my own evidence." Over the following months, Priya mentored Arya through her training, pushing her towards situations where she could prove her capabilities, protecting her from the kinds of assignments that were designed to demonstrate how people looked rather than what they could do. It was exactly what had been missing from Priya's own training, the kind of intentional support that would allow young people to develop their actual potential rather than struggling against the weight of others' expectations. A year into her role as head of the Security Integrity Division, Priya was invited to present the results of her division's first annual review to the full Leadership Council. This was a formal, public presentation attended by all the senior officials in the agency, media representatives, and government officials who overshadowed the intelligence services. Priya had prepared carefully, going through the year's findings, discussing the improvements in internal security protocols, presenting the framework for ongoing monitoring and assessment. As part of the presentation, the director had requested that Priya also discuss the philosophical foundations for the division's work. He wanted her to talk about what integrity meant in the context of an intelligence agency, how it could be maintained without compromising operational security, how it could be protected against the pressures and temptations that so often corrupted security services. Priya stood in front of the assembled leadership, the cameras recording, the journalists taking notes, and told them a story. She told them about a young woman who had joined the agency with exceptional ability, but who had spent years being told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that ability didn't matter as much as how she presented herself. She told them about the frustration of being overlooked, the exhaustion of constantly having to prove yourself, the bitterness of watching younger people climb past you simply because they looked the part. She told them about a mark on her back, a physical mark that had been used as the basis for secret observation long before she even knew it existed. The black viper mark, she said, was noted in classified assessments before I joined this agency. Someone identified me as having potential and decided to watch me, to assess me, to make decisions about my future without consulting me about it. In some ways, that observation protected me. It ensured that I would be brought into the agency, that my potential would eventually be recognized. But it also violated my dignity, my agency, my right to make my own choices about my own future. And that's what I want to talk about today, in the context of the Security Integrity Division. She took a breath, looking directly at the cameras. Integrity doesn't just mean that we identify problems. It means that we do so in ways that preserve the humanity and dignity of the people involved. It means that we make decisions transparently, that we respect the agency of the people who work for us, that we don't sacrifice their rights in the name of security. Because when we do that, when we tell ourselves that the surveillance is protective, that the covert decisions are necessary, that violating dignity is justified by results, we become corrupted in ways that are far more dangerous than the threats we're trying to prevent. She went on to outline the protocols her division had established, the ways that assessments would be transparent, that decisions about people would be made with their knowledge and input, that observation would be limited and justified and always disclosed when people reached positions where they needed to know they had been monitored. She talked about building an intelligence agency that could be both effective and principled, that could pursue security without sacrificing the values that security was meant to protect. When Priya finished her presentation, there was a long silence. Then, the director began to applaud. The applause spread through the room, and Priya could see people nodding, understanding the significance of what she had said. She had revealed herself. She had told the whole country about the mark on her back, about the years of covert observation, about the way she had been assessed and monitored without her knowledge. She had done it deliberately, in the most public way possible, stripping away the secrecy that had been used to justify the surveillance. That evening, Priya went home to her apartment and took off her shirt. She looked in the mirror at the black viper mark on her spine, the distinctive birthmark that had shaped her life in ways she had never fully understood until recently. It was a beautiful mark, actually, the scales of the viper outlined in deep black, almost like a tattoo but natural, present from birth. She had spent years hiding it, wearing high-necked clothes, never swimming or doing anything that would expose it. Now she understood why. It represented the moment when her life had ceased to be entirely her own, when she had become an asset to be developed rather than simply a person to be allowed to develop naturally. But, looking at the mark now, she didn't feel anger or resentment. She felt something more complex, a sense that the mark represented the exact moment when her trajectory changed, when forces beyond her control began pushing her toward the exact role she was now occupying. In a strange way, that mark had become a symbol not of violation but of purpose. It had been the reason she was identified, the reason she was watched, the reason she eventually came to occupy a position where she could change the agency's culture of integrity. 2 weeks after her presentation, Priya received notification that she had been promoted to deputy director of the agency, the second highest position in the entire organization. The promotion recognized her work with the Security Integrity Division but, also something else, her willingness to challenge the culture of secrecy and violation that had always been part of intelligence work. She was being brought into the highest levels of decision-making with the explicit mandate to continue pushing for change, to insist on integrity, to refuse to let necessity become an excuse for violating human dignity. In her new role, Priya oversaw multiple divisions, coordinated with international intelligence services, influenced policy at the highest levels of government. She was no longer the woman that trainees dismissed as just an analyst. She was no longer the person whose contributions went into footnotes. She was one of the most powerful intelligence officials in the country, and, more importantly, she was using that power to fundamentally change how intelligence work was conducted. Years later, when young people joined the agency, there would be a story told about her. The story would vary depending on who was telling it, but the core elements remained consistent. There was a woman with a mark on her back, a mark that had been noted in classified assessments before she even knew the agency existed. She had spent years being doubted, overlooked, and dismissed. But she had also spent those years becoming unquestionably capable, undeniably intelligent, and absolutely committed to her mission. When she finally was seen for what she truly was, when the mark was revealed and her significance made public, she hadn't used her power for revenge or to diminish those who had doubted her. She had used it to change the system, to make it more just, to ensure that other people with her kind of capability wouldn't have to struggle the way she had struggled. The Black Viper mark became a symbol in agency lore, not of special power or genetic superiority, but of the simple truth that capability exists independent of how it presents itself, that integrity requires acknowledging it regardless of traditional expectations, and that the systems we build to protect us are only as strong as our commitment to protecting the dignity of the people within them. And Priya, who had once been dismissed as too gentle, too soft, too feminine to do the work she was meant to do, became the architect of a new kind of security service. One that was neither weaker nor compromised by its principles, but stronger precisely because those principles were absolute. The trainee who had once dismissed her analysis in a classroom would eventually work for her, in a department she had established, following protocols she had created, operating under the understanding that capability was what mattered, not appearance. And every time he submitted analysis to her, he would think of the woman whose voice he hadn't respected, whose intelligence he had questioned, whose entire trajectory he had underestimated. He would think of the Black Viper mark and what it had come to mean. And he would try, in his own way, to be the kind of professional she had forced him to become. That was Priya's true power, not in the mark on her back, but in her refusal to let anyone's doubt define what she was capable of becoming. And, in that refusal, she had changed not just her own life, but the nature of the institution that had tried to contain her for so long.